Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so today we are opening up a really remarkable set of sources. They're all centered on Richard Schwartz's book, No Bad Parts. And this is pretty much the definitive guide to the therapeutic model known as internal family systems, or IFS. Now, you might be prepping for a meeting, maybe starting a personal journey, or maybe you're just, deeply curious about these frameworks that promise faster self-understanding. But the frustration often is wading through the jargon, right? And those sort of clinical walls that seem to spring up around psychology. So our mission here is simple. Tear down those walls. We want to offer you a kind of shortcut to really grasping IFS. It's a perspective that, honestly, can redefine your inner landscape.
Yeah, and we're not talking about small tweaks here. The central, really revolutionary idea in IFS, what makes it so powerful, is this core concept. All parts of us, every single impulse, every behavior, every fear, yeah, even the ones we really, really wish would just go away. They all have a purpose, and they inherently deserve compassion. It basically just throws out that whole idea of fixing yourself by fighting yourself.
Exactly. And the source material points this out right away. The core aha moment for anyone reading this stuff is realizing that self-judgment, well, that's the engine driving all your internal conflict. And if you can actually swap that judgment out for, like, genuine self-compassion and curiosity, you fundamentally change everything. You move towards inner peace, like shifting from this constant internal civil war to, I don't know, functional internal governance. Okay, let's unpack this framework. Let's meet the family.
Yeah, one of the first things that jumped out from the review was just how accessible this model is. Schwartz really seems to avoid that typical dense theoretical language. He talks to the reader like they're just starting out, discovering their own mind. It feels much more like a guide than a textbook.
That accessibility is so crucial because the concept itself, it's pretty counterintuitive, especially compared to a lot of traditional Western psychology. Instead of seeing our psyche as like one single thing, or maybe worse, like a battlefield between good urges and bad urges, IFS encourages us to see our inner system as the book calls it a complex but ultimately harmonious family of parts. So think of your parts almost like distinct personalities inside you. Each one has its own history, its own fears, its motivations, maybe even feels like a different age. I mean, if you, the listener, have ever thought something like, okay, a part of me really wants to quit this job, but another part is insisting I stick it out, well, you've already met your inner family. IFS just gives you the language, the framework to understand what those parts are doing, what their roles are. And that's a huge pivot away from resenting or trying to repress parts of yourself towards seeing every single element of your being as, well, an essential member of your internal system.
That reframing feels absolutely key. So instead of feeling shame or frustration when a part, say, acts out, you're encouraged to approach that same part with respect, almost.
Exactly. The question stops being, how do I shut this part down? And it becomes something more like, okay, what is this part trying so desperately to achieve from me by acting this way?
Right. Okay, so this is where it gets really fascinating, I think, as we start looking at the specific roles within this inner family. The sources spend a good amount of time detailing the parts that cause us the most friction day-to-day, the protectors.
Yeah, the protectors. These are the parts whose job it is to organize your life, basically, to keep you from feeling pain or shame or fear. They're inherently loyal, really, but their strategies can often be clumsy or extreme, sometimes just exhausting. And that's usually because they're kind of locked in a moment from the past. They might be reacting to something difficult that happened, decades ago.
Okay, hang on. Let me jump in here, because this is where I think maybe the skeptical part of the listener, and maybe even a part of me, kind of perks up. If the core message is no bad parts, how do we avoid just, letting ourselves off the hook, excusing bad behavior? Like, if my part that always procrastinates or self-sabotages is just a loyal defender, doesn't that sort of take away my responsibility to actually change that behavior?
That's a really, really good question, and it's something the framework is very clear about. You're not excusing the behavior, you're recognizing the positive intention behind it. The procrastination isn't the goal itself, right? The goal is usually protection, maybe protection from the vulnerability of trying or the potential pain of failure, or sometimes even the fear of success itself. So responsibility actually shifts. It moves from judging the behavior to understanding and addressing the underlying fear that's driving it. When a protector acts out, you don't fight it. The idea is you pause, you acknowledge it, maybe even thank it, like, okay, thanks for trying to keep me safe. And then you ask, what are you afraid will happen if you stop doing this? That one shift changes the whole dynamic. It moves from conflict to collaboration.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's about the intention, not necessarily endorsing the action. And we need to distinguish between Two main types of these protectors, right? So they operate pretty differently. Let's look at the managers first. These sound like the preemptive ones, the control mechanisms. They're your internal planner, maybe your inner critic, the part driving perfectionism. They try really hard to keep the exiles, those vulnerable feelings will get you locked away. They do that by trying to make sure life runs perfectly smoothly, controlling everything.
Yeah, think of a manager protector almost like the hypervigilant CEO of your internal life. They're the ones pushing you to overwork, maybe. Or they install that constant nagging self-criticism to make sure you never, ever make a mistake that could lead to, say, public shame. They love routine, they love control, and the second something goes off plan, the manager is that voice shouting, "See? I told you should have planned better." Their whole strategy is basically managing risk down to zero, which is, well, exhausting and pretty much impossible.
Right. And then you contrast that with the firefighters.
Exactly. So if the manager's careful planning fails, and maybe in exile that raw feeling bursts out, maybe you suddenly feel overwhelmed or incredibly lonely or devastated, that's when the firefighters rush in. Their job is to douse that emotional flame immediately, and they often use impulsive or distracting or even addictive means to do it.
Ah, okay. So the firefighters are the reactive ones, the emergency responders. They're the part that reaches for the ice cream after a terrible day, or the part that gets lost scrolling social media for hours, or maybe engages in those sudden bursts of anger or spending or something else intense. Their job isn't really managing life.
No, it's managing feeling, putting out the immediate fire, whatever it takes.
And the sources are quite clear. These two parts,
Yeah.
manager and firefighter, they're often in this constant internal battle, aren't they? Like the manager criticizes the firefighter for being impulsive, messy, undisciplined.
Right, and the firefighter only ever shows up because the manager's rigid control didn't work in the first place. It's this cycle.
Yeah, and that conflict is the feeling of self-criticism for so many people.
And the whole reason this conflict keeps going, the reason the managers are so controlling and the firefighters are so reactive, is because the entire system is desperately trying to keep the exiles hidden away. The exiles. These are the really young, vulnerable parts of us. They carry the pain, the shame, the fear from past difficult experiences or traumas. Think about like that intense feeling of not being good enough from childhood, or a deep sense of loneliness or betrayal. Exiles hold that really painful stuff that the protectors are terrified will just flood the system and overwhelm everything.
Okay, so the healing process then has to involve actually approaching these exiles, right, getting to the root.
Yes, but you can't just barge in. The sources emphasize this strongly. Approaching an exile needs the right kind of energy. It requires genuine curiosity and compassion. If you try to approach a vulnerable, exiled part with the judgment of a manager or the panic of a firefighter, it's just going to retreat further or completely overwhelm you. It won't work.
That feels like the perfect point to bring in the missing piece here, the element that allows that gentle approach, which is the true healing force in IFS, the self. If the parts are the sort of internal family members, the self is like the calm, wise, compassionate parent who can lead them. Schwartz explains the self not as something you have to like achieve or build up, but as your innate core. It's always there, apparently, but it often gets obscured or blended, as he calls it, with the parts.
Right. Like when you say, "I'm angry," IFS would say you're blended with an angry part. But when you're accessing your self-energy, you're able to observe the angry part, maybe with some detachment, some curiosity.
Okay, so it's about finding that observing place within.
Exactly. And the sources describe the self using these 8 C words, which are really helpful. Curiosity, calmness, clarity, compassion, confidence, creativity, courage, and connectedness. These 8 qualities are described as our inherent internal resources. They're what we're trying to tap into. So the goal of IFS therapy isn't about getting rid of parts. It's about helping the parts trust enough to step back a bit, to unblend, so that the self can lead the system.
So it's about accessing that core state.
Yeah. When you're operating from self-energy, you're basically in a place of non-judgmental awareness. And that's a critical distinction. It means you have clarity about what's actually happening, you feel compassion for the part that's struggling, and you have the courage to face the exile's pain without letting a panicked protector hijack your response. The self is kind of like the ultimate internal therapist, really, guiding the healing process.
Okay, so if the self is the leader we're aiming for, what does a self-led life actually look like, day to day? How does this change how you handle, say, inner conflict? Let's take that feeling of intense procrastination again. Maybe your old reaction was, frustration, maybe avoidance, definitely followed by beating yourself up, self-criticism. So the new approach using IFS would be?
The new approach is to pause. First step, just pause. Recognize the feeling, the urge to procrastinate is a part of you, not all of you. And then from that calmer, self-led place, you get curious. You actually ask the part, okay, what are you worried will happen if I start this task right now?
Okay, so that pause lets you unblend, get some space.
Precisely. It lets you access that self-energy. And when you ask, you might discover the procrastination is, say, a manager protector who's terrified of the pressure of needing to be perfect. And maybe that fear is rooted in an exiled memory, maybe from school, of being shamed for making a mistake.
Right.
So by listening compassionately to that protector, maybe reassuring it that you, the self, can actually handle potential failure or imperfection now, you free it from having to use such an extreme, rigid strategy. That's the mechanism for creating inner harmony. You're moving towards real self-acceptance because you're addressing the underlying needs, not just judging the surface actions.
The benefits mentioned in the review sound pretty profound. This shift leads to, it says, a greater sense of harmony internally, which makes sense. When the parts start to realize the self is actually present and capable and compassionate, they can relax. They can step back from those extreme, often exhausting roles.
Yeah, and all that energy you used to spend fighting yourself, criticizing yourself, managing yourself rigidly, that energy becomes available for, actual creative engagement with your life, with the world.
So for you, the listener, thinking about maybe exploring this, the framework is described as an invaluable companion. It sounds like it provides both the map of your inner world and the compass, the self, to navigate it effectively. And it seems genuinely accessible, but also intensely practical for anyone feeling stuck in those draining cycles of self-criticism and wanting to move towards something different. Okay, so just to quickly pull together the core insights from this deep dive into Richard Schwartz's work on IFS. First, the big one. There are truly no bad parts, only parts that have gotten stuck in extreme roles trying to protect you. Second, it reframes those actions we see as negative procrastination, anger, anxiety, as misguided protection attempts. We need to look for the positive intention. And third, the key to healing the vulnerable exiles and freeing up the protectors is accessing the self, that core of clarity, calm, and compassion within us.
Exactly, and the sources really emphasize that the ultimate goal, the aspiration of IFS, is to help people lead more peaceful, self-led lives. So if your immediate goal listening right now is maybe just to shift away from that relentless self-judgment towards a bit more acceptance, the critical first step, according to this model, is to try and embrace the positive intentions hiding behind every internal action. Look past the behavior itself and ask, what fear is this part trying to solve for me?
And maybe we can encourage you to explore that idea, maybe even right now. Think about the most frustrating internal reaction or behavior you noticed in yourself today. Maybe you was overreacting to a comment, maybe putting off something important again. Instead of just launching into criticism, try approaching that part with just a little bit of pure curiosity. Ask it, what deep fear might you be protecting me from right now? And just notice, how might asking that question with genuine curiosity begin to shift things? Could it bring about even a small moment of inner harmony? Something to think about. Thank you for diving deep with us.